having said that, I would like to introduce to you to our guest curator of this wonderful program, Barbaralee Diamonstein Spielvogel, who doesn't really need an introduction, but who I will introduce anyway. She has served as a leading voice in some of the defining urban issues of our time, some of which you see around you, including the preservation of the historically built environment of our country. She has brought unparalleled involvement to the arts, architecture, design, and public policy through roles that have brought her from the writer's desk to the White House. And she serves as a model for civic and cultural engagement. She's currently the chairperson of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, vice chair of the New York State Council on the Arts, director of the Trust for the National Mall in Washington, and she was the first director of the Office of Cultural Affairs in New York City, and she is the longest-serving commissioner of the New York City Landmarks Commission, Preservation Commission, and the first woman vice chair of more than 100 years of the U.S. Commission on the Fine Arts. There were lots of other firsts and kudos for Barbaralee, but you know them all anyway. But please join me in welcoming Barbaralee.
Thanks to each and all of you for coming this evening. It has been...
Can't hear you.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to thank you again. What has been especially pleasing, not only about the exhibition of the landmarks of New York, but the 5 programs that people were generous enough to respond to my invitation. And they've all been met with this kind of audience response, a great testimony to the public of Southampton and the quality of our guests. This evening's program, as you know, relates to the Highline. With us tonight are the dedicated and persevering co-founders of the Friends of the Highline, Joshua David on the far right, and Robert Hammond to his left. Is that what this is? At the end of the presentation, their presentation, the audience will have a chance to ask some questions of their own, and both Robert and Josh encourage the exchange. I hope your questions will be friendly and focused. The Highline is that well-publicized ribbon of greenery. It is an elevated, historic freight rail line that has been transformed into a public park on Manhattan's West Side. In fact, was it yesterday or the day before, the last section of the line was donated by CSX, and all the while that process was going on, these two guys don't waste any time. The design process was going on as well. It was going on so well that people obviously sought it out, and it was leaked on the internet today. So perhaps you'll tell us if there really will be a boxcar that will be transformed into a food stand on the last portion. The Highline is owned by the City of New York, maintained and operated by the Friends of the Highline. And I hope there'll be more Friends of the Highline after tonight. It was founded in 1999 by community residents, and 2 of the prime movers are our guests tonight, Josh and Robert. Friends of the Highline fought for the Highline's preservation and transformation at a time when the historic structure was under the threat of demolition. As I recall, one of our benefits had the demolition notice signed by a previous mayor to destroy the Highline, and it's a great artifact of history and a testimony to your vision and hard work. The Highline is now a nonprofit conservancy working with the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation to make sure that that lyrical sky, park in the sky, is maintained as an extraordinary public space for all visitors to enjoy, and enjoy they do. The park attracted 3 million visitors a year, 10 times the original estimate, and that has generated, as said, more than $2 billion in economic development. The amazing success of the Highline was due to an exceptional combination of intelligence, talent, determination, serendipity, naivete, how else could you fare forth? Timing and incredible good luck, and primarily the vision and guiding force of Robert and Josh. Before he turned his attention to the Highline, Josh had pursued various writing assignments. My favorite was he was a long-term contributing editor to Brides magazine. In addition to that, he worked for Gourmet, Travel and Leisure, and Wallpaper. He was a member of the Advisory Council of Transportation Alternatives and served on Community Board Number 4's Transportation and Planning Committee, where he and Robert first became acquainted with each other and with the Highline. Co-founder and executive director of the Friends, Robert is a self-taught artist, consultant, a jewelry craftsman, and entrepreneur. He was awarded the Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome in 2009, and I hope someone will ask him what his very interesting project was. He also served as an ex officio board member of the Metropolitan Museum of Art for 3 years. The Highline is a miracle of sorts, an unusual and sophisticated concept for a public space, which made its way through the design process, the political process, and the construction process in New York City, largely intact. In the few short years since the Highline opened in 2009, it has become an iconic part of the New York City landscape and has been called one of the most successful real estate development initiatives in the history of New York. In fact, it has been likened to the building of the Grand Central Railroad and the impact that has made on the city. It's also becoming a rallying cry for urban developers everywhere. And as a result, a string of urban projects have emerged seeking to turn out-of-use infrastructures into urban oases. I'm not sure everybody has a disused elevated rail line, however. You'll hear more about that and other developments from Robert and Josh. Before I welcome them once again, I would like to remind you that our next session is on Thursday, August 9, and I'm pleased to report that every session has been sold out with extensive waiting lists. So please sign up now to hear Robert A.M. Stern in conversation. Besides being a very successful architect, he's the Dean of the Yale School of Architecture and was the Dean of the Historic Preservation Program at Columbia University. His subject is honoring the past without neglecting the future. Now we turn to Josh and to Robert, who have done really a miraculous job. And there are not only many, many thousands of New Yorkers that are in their debt, but visitors from around the world. Thank you for coming to Southampton. We look forward to hearing your exciting tale.
Well, I want to thank the parish for hosting us. I love cultural institutions that also still sell postcards. So I just stocked up on a whole bunch. But I really also want to thank Barbaralee for her role in this project. Now it's hard to imagine, and we'll talk about why it was not a very popular project when we started it, but most people wanted to tear it down, and even the people that liked the idea thought it was pretty crazy and that definitely we would never be able to pull this off. And she was one of the people that came to us very early on, was one of our founding board members, and really helped us in a lot of different ways make this happen. So Barbara, thank you. It's been an honor to be here with So we're going to give you just a little background, because I think the history of the Highline is almost as interesting as it is what it is today. Just to orient people, well, I'm just sort of curious, how many people have been to the Highline? Oh, nice. So you'll know where, most of y'all know where it is. It's on the west side of Manhattan. It's currently about 1.5 miles running on the west side. But it originally was a freight line. Some people think it was an old L or a subway, but it was a freight line that ran right down 10th Avenue. And it was nicknamed Death Avenue because so many people were run over by this confluence of horses and automobiles and trains, that the railroad, which was the New York Central line, hired a guy on horseback to run in front of the trains. He became known as the Westside Cowboy. And this is a great picture because it was actually taken in 1934. You can see the Highline had just been built in the background. So it's just, not that long ago this cowboy was running down these streets of New York. But he wasn't that, he either wasn't that good, or I guess the trains were really fast because,
He got run over.
well, no, other people did. Still, even with a cowboy, about one person was run over every month. So they elevated, and it was part built in tandem with a Robert Moses, a Westside Improvement Project, which started in 1930 and completed in 1934. And right, elevated. It was when they were taking down a lot of the old L's, so they actually put some of it mid-block, so it wouldn't be right in the middle of 10th Avenue. And this picture was also taken right. You can still see the trains running down 10th Avenue. There's London Terrace in the background. I mean, you can still see a lot of landmarks that are still there. That's the Kitchen Cultural Center right there. This is it running through the what was the Bell Labs building. It is now the Westbeth Artist Housing.
Wow. The last train stopped. The train stopped running around 1980, and then it went dormant. And there was almost immediately a movement to tear it down, basically led by underlying property owners who had land underneath the Highline. Basically, there was no land that's associated with the Highline. It's an easement that allows the structure to exist on privately owned land that's underneath it. And so when the train stopped running, those property owners fought to have it removed so that they could build on their land. This is the way that Robert and I initially encountered the Highline. It was from the street, looking up at it, this monumental, dark, brooding structure. And this is actually the Highline that we fell in love with. People think that we climbed up there and saw the amazing views and the amazing landscape that was up there, but we actually didn't. We just saw this structure, thought it was a really amazing piece of work. We're really intrigued by the stories that it held in the history of our neighborhood. We didn't know each other. Robert lives in the West Village, I live in Chelsea. And we just separately noticed it and began to be interested in it. What we didn't know was that up on top of it, this incredible self-seated landscape had taken over the rail beds. There's very little soil material up there. It was just gravel ballast, and over the passage of time, seeds would drift down from the sky. The hardiest of them would be able to survive in that very inhospitable situation, and then over time they would grow up and die and grow up and die and create some more organic material until you had this incredible carpet of greenery and wildflowers that would change throughout the season, running through Manhattan. Robert and I met at a Community Board 4 meeting. We didn't know each other. We both read an article in the New York Times that said the Highline was going to be torn down. We were intrigued with it. We thought there was something better to do with it than tearing it down. And happened to sit next to each other. We were really the only two people in the room who were interested in possibly doing something with the Highline. Everybody else there was in favor of demolishing it. And I think that the thing that really struck both of us, we came at it without any of the things that you need to do a project like this. I think Barbaralee introduced us well. I was a freelance writer. Robert was an artist and internet consultant. We'd never done anything like this. We didn't have any specific plan. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any relevant experience. But there was the Highline in front of us, this incredible opportunity, unlike anything else. You couldn't always see it from the street. From the street, when you look at the Highline in a lot of places, you only see a little tiny bit of it, because then it hides behind buildings after it. And I think I had thought, living for 15 years in this neighborhood before getting interested in the Highline, that it was just a series of remnants, that there was a piece, but then it was torn down, and then there was another piece, and then it was torn down. But the realization that it was pulled from Gansevoort Street all the way up to 34th Street, touching down on 22 different New York City blocks, running through 3 different New York City neighborhoods, the Meatpacking District, West Chelsea with all of the galleries that were coming in there, and going up to the rail yards and the Javits Center, the way that it moved through the city, through the center of city blocks, 30 feet in the air. I think both of us were struck by that opportunity and what you could do with it. Unfortunately, we were up against a pretty mighty foe. The Giuliani administration had already decided that they wanted to tear the Highline down. And actually, in fairness to that administration, the Dinkins administration before him also was in favor of demolition.
I never say in fairness to that administration.
No, it actually it goes back actually to another whole New York City story, which was Westway. I don't know how many people remember Westway.
Oh,
but
yeah.
if Westway had been built, the Highline, it needed complicated exit things out of the tunnel from Westway, and the Highline would have been in the way of that if Westway had gone forward. So that it was an earlier reason that people wanted to tear it down. But in our early days, we went to the Giuliani administration, tried to get them to reconsider their decision. It wasn't an administration known for reconsidering past decisions. And so we actually had to sue the city of New York to stop this demolition process from going forward. As Barbaralee mentioned, in the last days of the Giuliani administration, papers were signed committing the city to tearing down the Highline, and that's what we challenged in court. At the same time, we were just the two of us, but we also got ourselves a logo. Robert was working with Paula Scher at Pentagram on another project that he was doing, and asked her to donate her services to create a logo. And I don't know how many of you know Pentagram and Paula Scher and their incredible work, but it was just amazing that she stepped forward to do this. And when she did it for us, she said, you know, this isn't just going to be your logo for Friends of the Highline. This is going to be the logo for the park when you open it. And at that point, we really didn't think we would really open it. But she was like a lot of the people who began to come to us and help us. She was even more convinced of our ability to carry this forward than I think we were. The other important thing that we did very early on, besides creating this logo and an impressive set of graphic materials with which to represent the project, was to bring up this amazing American photographer, Joel Sternfeld. Robert and I had taken pictures when we had gone up and visited the Highline, but they always looked sort of lousy. They looked like a field of an empty parking lot full of weeds. And when we showed them to people, it actually made them less interested in it. So somebody suggested Joel was somebody who might be able to capture the special quality of what was up there. And Robert took him up one day, and Joel fell in love with the site. And we arranged with CSX, the railroad that owned it, for Joel to have exclusive access to the site. It was closed off and fenced and padlocked. And so he got the key, and he was allowed to go up there whenever he wanted for the course of an entire year. So he spent a year photographing it. So this was one of the most famous photographs that he took. This is one of his photographs in fall, another one in winter. And he did an exhibition of these at Pace Gallery and then a publication called Walking the Highline. And those came out at very strategic times in our fight to save the Highline. So it was a key piece of our advocacy efforts to save it. But it also really acquainted people with the magic of what was up there. And for a long time, we withheld showing any kind of renderings of what we were going to do up there. And it made people picture their own vision of what it could be. People held it in their head, what the Highline could be. And then in the end, it ultimately really influenced the design of what we created up there. When we started to work with a design team, we began to shape the vision of what we wanted to create up there. People were so in love with the feeling that he'd captured with the power of nature to overcome this monumental steel structure, that it ended up being a great influence on the design. Another thing that we had to do around this time was Mayor Bloomberg came into office and he offered us the opportunity to argue the case for the Highline. We showed Deputy Mayor Dr. Off all the pretty pictures I just showed you. He said that those are a lot of very pretty pictures. But I need to know what it means economically. It was right post 9/11. The city's finances were not looking very promising at that moment. And the way that this project could affect the economy of New York was one of the key questions that was put to us. So we commissioned an economic feasibility study that basically looked at the feasibility of actually doing it, of actually making a park on the Highline, but also looked at the money side of it. How could new revenues associated with increased property values around the project help defer some of the costs? And in doing that, we looked at the way well-designed, well-kept parks are great adders of value to property around them. And Central Park is the great example of that in New York City. Just a few years after it was constructed, the monies that began to come into the city through increased property taxes were very quickly returning the investment that was made in it. Central Park is a very unusual example in its location and its size. So as we were doing the study, we looked at much smaller parks throughout New York City and other linear parks across the country to try and form a model formula of how the property values around a project like the Highline might be affected. We also looked at the benefits that could come from to the neighborhood through the concept of it becoming a marketable district, and we looked at places like Gramercy Park for this. In Gramercy Park, there are buildings that are right around the park, and those clearly derive extra value from the park being there. But even a building a block away or 2 blocks away from the park is still in what people in New York come to know as Gramercy Park, and it adds values to those properties as well. And then we thought a similar thing could happen with the Highline. And this was actually out of the PowerPoint that came from that study at that time. The numbers have changed a lot since then. But we were looking at costs estimated about $100 million at that time, and revenue that would come from increased property tax revenues coming to the city that were derived from the presence of this park of $262 million over a 20-year period. Both of these numbers went up. The expense of building the Highline went up to 30th Street, up to $150 million, and the increased tax revenues that are now projected over a 20-year period are much higher than 262. It's more like $900 million.
Wow.
So the Giuliani administration, the Bloomberg administration got on board after this economic planning study. But it was 2003. Most people didn't even know what the Highline was. We didn't have any money. The property owners underneath were still suing the city to go through with the Giuliani effort to demolish it. So we did an ideas competition. And this was really meant to help create awareness and just people think about the Highline. And so we urged people they didn't have to be realistic, and this was one of our favorites for many reasons. But the idea of a mile-long lap pool that would cut right through the city. Other ones where this was more of a political manifesto, that you would imprison people in the I-beams of the Highline. I don't know what the pool was doing now, but I think this was playing off of High and Highline maybe. Some of them, this is actually interesting. This was more looking not at design, but what would be the programming that would happen in and around the Highline. And this is really should come true. Another favorite was a roller coaster that you would see in people's apartments and zoom down. Someone should do this somewhere. And we had an exhibition at Grand Central because the idea was we didn't want it to just be a local project, that we wanted people, that this was important for the whole city, and New York Central was named after the Central Railroad that built the Highline. We also wanted to involve people in this. One of the advantages that Josh and I, we're not an architect or a planner, is we didn't have a specific idea of what it should be. We always said, ultimately the city and the community should decide what it is. So this is a postcard we sent out for one of our community engagement input talks. We've now done over almost 24 of these. We have one actually in New York on the Highline at 14th Street on Monday at 6:30, we're going to hear the design team talk about the designs that were just leaked on the internet. But it was supposed to be the first time you'd see them. But and so, you know, we also, we started out very much, you know, in opposition to the city, you know, fighting, sort of fighting City Hall. But this really has become a public-private partnership, and it extends to all levels, not just the city. We had a huge supporter in then Senator Clinton, Christine Quinn, and formerly Gifford Miller, the speakers of the City Council, Amanda Burden, Jerry Nadler, Chuck Schumer, and we always love showing this picture because you notice that none of them are looking at each other. Or maybe you can tell, is that something they teach, you know, elected officials to, you know. So we still were, you know, we had the public officials on board, but we were still fighting the property owners. And as Josh explained, they had understandable reasons of wanting to tear it down. It was a big steel structure in the middle of their property, and they own the air rights above it and below it. So one of the ways that, you know, everybody knows the famous landmarking of Grand Central, but one of the lesser known stories is how the air rights were transferred from the terminal to around the lots around it. And it's also what helped save the theaters more recently in the 90s in Times Square. So working with Amanda Burden, the chair of the City Planning Commission, we helped develop a concept of a transfer of development rights that allowed the property owners to transfer their development rights anywhere in the district. So it basically allowed them to monetize that and get them on board. And so that was really one of the last hurdles of opposition.
And with the West Chelsea rezoning in place, that basically cleared the way for us to actually go forward and design and construct the Highline. And so a real design process happened. What Robert was showing before was, as he explained, an ideas competition. They didn't have to be realistic, they didn't have to be feasible, but we did now need to go into the actual design process. And I always like this picture as a way to describe the real challenge of what creating a public landscape on the Highline was all about. There was an incredible landscape up there that we loved, but even when you took just a small group of people just like this up there, it would all get trampled down just by that small group of people, and it also wasn't safe. It wasn't up to codes that could accept public visitorship. So this was really the challenge that we put to the teams that wanted to compete to build to design the Highline. We started with 71 teams. They were all multidisciplinary with landscape architects, historic preservation consultants, engineers, security consultants. Started with 71 teams, narrowed them down to 7, then narrowed them down to 4. The team that we selected was James Corner Field Operations and Diller Scafidio and Renfro with the Dutch horticulturist Pete Rudolph. And one of the prime reasons that team was selected was their ability to address that central question. How do you create a publicly accessible landscape that conveys the feeling of the original landscape of nature reclaiming a monumental man-made structure. So you can see here, this is one of the renderings from their original competition entry. And what's amazing is how much it actually looks like the Highline that actually got built. It's very often these things change dramatically from the competition phase through to construction, but this vision remained very much on track the entire time. This is another board that came from the competition process, showing the central element of their design, which was a concrete planking system that allowed the plants to come up through the walkway very much in a similar fashion to the way that plants came up through the gravel ballast of the Highline, sort of pushing up through the hard surfaces. And these were all the different ways that you could employ it. It was a modular, flexible system, so that you, on the left-hand side, if you had an area where there were more people that were going to gather, you could have more hardscape, and then you could have different ratios of hardscape to plant material depending on what the need of the space was. Going all the way over to the right, which was a condition that they called the flyover, which would allow you to plant the full width of the Highline from one side to another, but to do that you would need to lift up and go we actually didn't think when we selected them that we would ever do that condition, that it was just an academic idea. But we were very excited when it actually turned out that we could. So this is the Highline under construction. This is probably 2008. So all of the original landscape had to be removed in order for us to rehabilitate the underlying structure. And here you can see the concrete planking system being installed and the rail tracks being reinstalled. All of the tracks that were on the Highline before we removed them, they got tagged with little yellow numbers, and you can still see those yellow numbers on the tracks on the Highline today. And they got marked up on a survey, so whenever we put tracks back into the park, they landed in the exact same location that they had been originally. And so there are several different key components of the design that make the Highline the special place that it is today. I think one of them is the special quality of this paving system that allows the plants to push up through the hard surface, which you can see here. This is right before we opened. These plants are much denser now. This is again that same planking system employed in a different location. This is up at around 19th Street. And an aerial view of that same system. The other thing that makes it really a unique environment in New York City is the quality of the plant material that's up there. And Pete Rudolph was selected out by this design team because of the quality of his very naturalistic quality of a lot of his plantings. He uses large-scale massings of grasses and perennials to create very naturalistic landscapes that we felt were really in keeping with what the Highline should be. This is in that same area we saw earlier, the Chelsea grasslands up at 19th Street. This is a place called the Chelsea Thicket around 22nd Street, approximately, where we have a very enclosed walkway, very intimate and protected space. And even one of the things that Pete has our gardeners do is all of some people in perennial gardens before the end of the season, they clean everything up and chop everything down before the winter. The plants are healthier if you leave the dead material in place. It protects them from snow, but also the quality of the spent seed pods and the dead branches creates a sculptural quality that he feels is really important, and really does give it a lot of winter interest when there's snow and ice on these dead plants. It's really very beautiful. Another thing that we spent a lot of time working on that is one of the really special qualities of this design is the lighting program, which was designed by L'Observatoire. You can see on the upper right-hand quadrant of this slide the red dotted line. What the lighting team, they went up there at night, and one of the things they noticed at night before there was anything up there except the natural landscape, there was no lighting, was that the light of the buildings around you and the light of the night sky were much more discernible because you didn't have the standard New York City street light shining down on you. It lets your pupils remain more dilated and you're better able to see the night sky. So they wanted to do a design where all of the lighting would be at waist level or below, shining down, so it was never light in your eyes. So you can see the initial renderings of that idea here. And these were the fixtures that were created just for the Highline to allow that. They're all LED lighting fixtures. And we had to add these stainless steel rails because the historic railings of the Highline were just a few inches below what code required. So we needed to do something to bring them up just a few inches. Took the opportunity to integrate the lighting system into those railings, always looking for chances to have less added things to the environment up there. And this is the ultimate result of the lighting program. If you haven't been up there at night, in summer in particular, it's really beautiful. It's one of the nicest times to go up there. The plantings are really beautifully illuminated with the system. And that's the lighting view from above. Another thing that we spent a lot of time with the design team on is designing spaces that would be social, where there was a lot of interaction between people in the spaces. I think there was the idea going into it that this is a linear park, it's a path, it would be used in a linear fashion, people would walk through it, but we didn't want people just to get on stay, to occupy it, to interact with each other. And so this is one of the places where we did that with a water feature, where the water just skims over the walkway, and it's really, really popular. The seating, that was another way to do that, so we created a lot of seating, and certainly helping foster social interaction. But seating is a really important thing in park design, and we spent a lot of time figuring out where were the places that were most likely to encourage people to gather and interact. And this is the lawn at 23rd Street, which accomplishes a similar thing. And then another very special quality of the design is the way that the design team has taken advantage of particular perspectives that are available up and down the Highline. They've selected out very special opportunities where there are unique views, and done designs that are responsive to those views. And this is, I think, the most dramatic of them, the 10th Avenue Square, where the structure has actually been cut away, the visitors taken down into the belly of the structure, in a place where it was most densely constructed. The amount of steel that was in this part of the Highline was just huge. I mean, there were tons and tons of steel. It was because the trains had to be carried over 10th Avenue on a diagonal there, so it was very heavily built. So all of that was removed. It was all re-engineered to allow you, to give you this opportunity to watch the traffic of 10th Avenue. And what's amazing to me is when you look at 10th Avenue from the street, it's not a particularly beautiful avenue. There's not much poetry in it when you look at it from the street. But when you're up at this viewpoint and you sit there and you watch the traffic flow and the timing of the lights, and it stops and it starts, and all of the tail lights, and all of the watching people on the streets below. It's like a little ballet. It's like a performance piece, and people stay there for long periods of time to just continue watching. Pardon me. This happens in a number of. There are some other places where similar things happen. This is on the flyover. This is about at 27th Street. This is the 26th Street viewing spur, another place where the design team has taken an opportunity to create an overlook that really focuses down on the street life below. And you can see here the same thing happens with the 10th Avenue Square. It's a two-way system. It's great for people who are up in these viewing areas looking down, but it also, for people who are on the street, it turns the people who are on the Highline into a performance as well, as you can see here, sort of like actors on screen. Oops. And this is the 30th Street viewing spur, which looks both east on 30th Street and out to the river. It's one of the really spectacular spots on the Highline. And then they really took advantage of the unique way that the Highline cuts through the center of city blocks and creates this very unusual environment. And this is, I think, the image that really captures that more than anything else. This is the unique way of viewing New York City running through the center of city blocks with these very close and unusual relationships with the buildings around you.
And one of the great things is not only does the Highline have interesting design, but it's encouraged the developers around it to use great architects. This is a spot at 18th Street where you can see a building by Frank Gehry, Jean Nouvel, Neil Denari, Annabelle Seldorf, Shigeru Ban. And so it's this combination of, it runs through 4 historic districts, but it also, you can see some of the great new architecture by walking on the Highline. And one of the most exciting developments is that the Whitney is moving downtown. They're going to be leaving the Breuer building, which the Met is thankfully taking over, and moving down to the very base of the Highline at Gansevoort. This is the new building designed by Renzo Piano. They broke ground last year, and they're slated to open in 2015. And the little building sort of below it, with the darker stone, is going to be our headquarters, where we're going to have our offices, our maintenance facility, public bathrooms, public programming. And if you go down to the Highline at this site right now, you can see it's already, the steel's framed out, and we're looking to open this next year. We're also going to have a space underneath where we're going to be adding a restaurant right under the Highline. This is some of the, just direct, Josh talked a little bit about the economic benefits to the city and almost the $900 million in tax revenues they're estimating over 20 years. This is what's happened already in just sort of in new development, job creations and other things since, spurred by the Highline. So, the organization Josh and I started, Friends of the Highline, now we manage and operate the Highline, very similar to the Central Park Conservancy or the Madison Square Park. All the employees you see up on the Highline, gardening, there's a lot of trash, tending the Highline in all different kind of weather, are employees of Friends of the Highline, and they're supported by people that are members of the Highline. I see we have a few members here tonight, so thank you all. We don't get any city money we've gotten money to help build it. The costs of building it were roughly split between private money and city money. But all the money to pay all these employees is private. The only thing that the city funds is the security. So, as Barbaralee mentioned, we thought we would have about 300,000 visitors a year. That's what the Guggenheim and the Whitney get. We thought, that's sort of a middle-sized cultural institution. Last year we had 3.7 million visitors. Some busy weekends, Friday to Sunday already, we're seeing almost 100,000 people, which puts it to about 1 million more than MoMA last year, which is great in terms of the local businesses. A lot of them have said the recession ended with the Highline open, great for tourism. But one of our concerns is we've always wanted the Highline to be for New Yorkers and owned by New Yorkers. That it's great if visitors come, but it really should be a place for New Yorkers. And so that's really where our programs come in. This year we're going to do over 450 free programs throughout the year. This is a picture of a step festival that we do where we have kids from schools in all 5 boroughs come and compete on the Highline. We do a variety of kids programs. In the summer we have kids programs every Wednesday and Saturday. Yesterday we did a butterfly release. Upcoming we have a ladybug release. This is something from our work yard kit that we do every Saturday. We do salsa dancing once a month. And so if you're interested in any kind of programming, especially with a lot of kids and family, but also talks and lectures on the Highline. One of the other things, Josh was talking about the planting is constantly changing. But another way that we do things that encourage the locals to keep coming up and seeing what's changing is the art program. The Highline runs through the heart of Chelsea, the gallery district, more galleries in Chelsea than anywhere else in the world. But it's sometimes not that accessible to people. Do the galleries really want you in there? And Chelsea is also much harder. Soho is much easier, a lot of storefront galleries, you can look in the window. Chelsea, a lot of them are in buildings. And so this is a way for people to come to the neighborhood and experience art. And all the art is temporary. So if you don't like it, it's going to go away. If you like it, come back a lot and see it. This is was one of the people's favorites that we did, a piece by Sarah Z that just came down last month, and it had bird feeders on it. And I was convinced, I said, no bird is ever going to go and eat out of this right next to all these people. And as often I was wrong, and the birds loved it, and the people. We have a new art curator, Cecilia Balamani, who started this summer, and last summer, and people kept asking, what big project are you going to do on the Highline? So in response, she did a show called Lilliput, and it's all little sculptures sort of hidden in the grasses and parts of the Highline. And this is a piece by Kawasaki, and his name is Carson. He's at 14th Street. This is another piece from that work.
And so we're 2/3 done with the Highline. We've gone from Gansevoort to 30th Street, and now the final remaining third is at the Westside Railroads. And Barbaralee mentioned some amazing news that we had this past week, which was that the railroad donated this final section to the city of New York. just this past week, which is really amazing because what it means is once it's in city ownership, it's very difficult for anybody ever to tear it down. You have to go through all sorts of public processes. And it also means that we have the opportunity to now go forward and actually begin creating the third section of the park up here. This is basically the configuration of the rail yards. This is a full third of the Highline, even though it's just 30th to 34th because it's running east-west here. The square footage is the equivalent of the 2 10-block runs to the south of it. On the left is what we call pardon me, on the right is what we call the eastern rail yards, on the left is the western rail yards. Long Island Railroad tracks. It used to be a freight yard, and now it's commuter train. This was the proposed site for the Olympics that are happening now. We tried to get them, and this is where the stadium was going to go. So this was part of the very complex history of taking the Highline forward, was working the same mayoral administration that was taking the Highline forward also wanted to take this forward, and it was a very complicated time for us. That proposal went down, and now what's happening on that site is the Hudson Yards development. It's over 12 million square feet of mixed-use development, hotels, residences, commercial space, a school, a lot of parkland at the center of it, and now with the Highline secure, the Highline will go be parkland that goes all the way around the edges of it. I'm just going to show you just a couple of the designs that we're working on now for this section. As we've talked about, there's a lot more available as of today.
Go to
on
curb.com.
You'll see a lot more as of just a few hours ago. But this is one of the things that we found was we reinstalled a lot of the rail tracks in the southern two sections, but they're always in planting beds where there are a lot of grasses and perennials. So there are areas that we don't allow people to walk in, but there's a very natural urge for people, particularly kids, to go in and walk on the rails. And there is this quintessential experience that I think people have in their mind of walking on rail tracks. And so we wanted to see how we could make that more available to people. So there'll be a feature in the rail yard section called the rail track walk, where you'll be encouraged actually to walk on the tracks. The bench form that's all up and down the Highline, which was designed really to have the benches be integrated into the landscape. They're called peel-up benches, and you can see on the upper left the basic peel-up bench, one without a back and one with a back, that was created as part of the original design. And the whole idea was instead of having an additional piece of furniture that got dropped into the park, that the furniture was part of the walkway system. It just grew out of the walkway system. So in this third section, we're looking at a whole bunch of different ways we can take that basic peel-up bench design and rework it to do a number of different things, whether it's a bench with a little desk, whether it's as a planter, whether it becomes a picnic table. There's a great idea to make a seesaw out of it, or to even use it as a water feature. So you'll see a lot of the benches doing a lot of new things in the third section. This is one of the parts that we had to fight the hardest to save. It's called the Spur. It goes, the Highline goes north, curves to the west to take you out to the river, and this is the part that's back towards the east. It sits over 10th Avenue. And it's a really amazing space because you can look up and down 10th Avenue from there, and you can look all the way down to that 10th Avenue Square where you can descend into and there's this great visual correspondence from those two places. And it was really the most threatened part of it as we were fighting to save the rail yard section. And so we want to make a pretty grand gesture in that location. And we don't have a public performance space anywhere on the Highline. And this is the biggest area of square footage on the entire Highline. So we're looking at this as an opportunity to create a kind of theater in the round. We also don't have a dedicated children's feature on the Highline yet. And we're going to work it into the rail yard section. This is called the play beams, and essentially what's happening is the concrete decking that's over the beam structure that originally held up the gravel ballast in the tracks is going to be removed, so the beams will be exposed, and a rubber playground type coating will cover the metal beams. and will allow kids to go down into the body of the structure itself. And then we're also experimenting with what we're calling an interim walkway. We're going to do the full capital build-out on a portion of the Western Rail Yards, but on another portion, we're going to leave the existing landscape. The greatest expense in building the Highline is doing the full rehabilitation of the structure, which requires removing all of the tracks in the existing landscape. In order to move forward quickly now, we're able to do a portion of it with full capital build-out, but the funds aren't all assembled to go all the way around. So we'll be doing an interim walkway on the Western Rail Yards, which is just going to be a very simple path integrated into the existing tracks that will allow people to see the original landscape, the landscape that really inspired them all. So I think this is actually, even though it is an interim condition, I think it's going to be, for many people, may well be their favorite part of the line, to be able to interact with that original landscape. Oops, wrong way. And so we've taken you through a very brief version of the trajectory that we've been on the Highline, and our 13-year experience since 1999 making this project happen. But just a little earlier, actually it was in fall of 2011, we released a book that tells the story in a great deal more depth. And if you're interested in how all of this came about, I urge you to check it out, because it's behind everything that Robert and I just told you. There's a much deeper story involving a lot more people. We're up before you tonight, and we get a lot of credit for this happening, but there were thousands of people making this happen, and we try in the book to begin to give you an idea of all of the different players who came from all the different angles, whether they be our neighbors in the community, whether they be our elected officials, whether they be the design team that worked so hard to make this incredible design, whether it be our donors. We have thousands of individual members and a small group of major campaign donors who've contributed very significant sums of money to help us build the structure. All of those people come into play in the story as we're able to tell everyone. We have a little bit longer form to work with. And people like Barbaralee, who was on our board, and our founding board chair, Phil Ahrens, and our current board chair, John Alshaw, and all of our supporters. We try and give them some thanks for what they made possible here. So with that, I thank you all for coming here tonight to hear a little bit about that.
Encourage you to ask some questions. And I have one other announcement. As I was looking at those beautiful designs and reminded of the work of the design team, particularly the architects, this Landmarks of New York will be traveling to 15 cities throughout New York State. One of them is New York City, where we'll open at the Historical Society about December 10th. And one of the speakers there, I expect you all to come, will be Liz Diller. Diller, Video and Renfro. And her subject will be the landmarks of tomorrow, because she is not only responsible for the Highline, but for the redo of Lincoln Center, and the shed, which you might want to tell them about, that comes off the bottom of the Hudson Yards. So thank you, Josh and Robert, for a remarkable presentation about an astounding project. If you haven't been, please go. You won't be sorry. But if you have questions now, I saw some hands raised. Why don't you answer them?
Just to what Barbaralee referred to was the Culture Shed, which is a building designed by Diller, Scafidi, and Renfro, and it would go up in the Hudson Yards as they've set aside in the zoning space for a cultural center. And it's basically a Kunsthal that would be able to retract and move out, so for different kinds of uses. So it's still in its early stages, but a really interesting phase.
Yeah, so the question was, how long did it take for a sizable movement to coalesce around us? How long were we just the two guys, and how long did it take for people to mobilize around us? It actually was surprisingly quick. I think both Robert and I thought it was going to be much harder than it was to get other people interested in it, and I think we thought a lot more people would turn us away and reject our requests for help. But I think there was something about the underdog quality of the project, and something that was so compelling about the idea, that a lot of people came around us very quickly. A small group of people who became our founding board members actually came together pretty quickly, and they're all named in both Phil Aarons and an architect named Gary Handel and Barbaralee and Mario Duarlo. That was a core group, but very quickly a larger group of people assembled, and it was actually they kept us going a lot of times. I think there were times when you could easily want to quit because it seemed so daunting. But the fact that all of these other people had joined us really did help keep us going.
Hi, my question, back in the 70s, I used to live down in Chelsea long before it got gentrified. But if I were to wanting to go see the Highline, how do I get on it? And where do I get on it? Are there arms and lofts and things like that?
So the question was, how do you get on the Highline if you want to come see it? There are 4 elevators, so one of the great things about it is anywhere you can walk on the Highline, you can go in a wheelchair as well. And there are, I think, 8 or 10 stairs. Almost every 2 blocks there's a stair. So starting at Gansevoort Street, 14th Street, 16, 18, 20, 23, 26, 28, 30 are all stairs. And if you go to our website at thehighline.org, it has a map, but you can take, Yeah, and the elevators are at 14th, 16th, 23rd, 30th, and 10th Avenue, basically. But if you go to our website, you can also see where the nearest subway is.
Oh.
Let's go to the back of the room, over here on the side.
I just wanted to add, take your bike down the west side. A lot of garages let you park right there.
Right now. And, but
What was it?
yeah.
What'd you say?
The comment was bring your bike, because the garages in the area will let you park it while you come to the Highline. But a point that I do need to make is you can't take your bike on the Highline. Unfortunately, there's no biking.
Thank you. Want me to stand?
Sure.
I don't mind. I'm a Big Apple greeter and a New York City tour guide. And I take people every month. And they love it. And I love it. And thank you. And I have many questions, but I'm not going to ask all of them. I just, what would you most like to be conveyed to the tourists that see it? Like, there's so many things, about it that they love, as I do. And I'm not sure what.
We will have very different answers.
I can guess what
his
his
answer
answer. No, I can guess
Sure.
what you're.
No, it's because his will be more inspired. I'd like to convey to them that the thing that they're seeing and the thing that they're enjoying is entirely dependent on private philanthropic contributions. People come to it and they think it's a New York. It's a New York City park, and they think it's free and it's paid for by the city. And it's not. It's paid for by donors, charitable donors, our members, and so they should be encouraged to become members and support it, because the only way to be able to continue to have that experience is if people continue to support it financially.
And I do want them to become members too. But one of my goals is that it also inspires other people to start their own kind of projects, not just on elevated rail lines, but any kind of projects. I think, as Josh, we get a lot of credit for doing this. The most important thing we did was start it and allow other people to, you don't have to have all the experience, all the money, or all the plan. And what's so great is, so many people, we talk, and one of the great things about doing this is you just hear about all these great projects, that people are starting all over.
Let's go to the back again. So somebody.
What type of irrigation? That's one thing you mentioned. The road plant line.
Yeah, we actually, when we opened the section 1, Pete Uldoff, the planning designer, did not want us to put in-ground irrigation. He wanted it all to be hand-watered. and we were naive, and we listened to his advice, and it proved to be very, very difficult because, as you can imagine, it's basically a bridge. So it heats from above and below. And one of the issues is it's very crowded and narrow and watering and getting the hoses. We actually installed in-ground irrigation in section 2, and just this spring we installed it in section 1. Still, some of it does have, a lot of it has to be hand watered. One of the problems is a lot of them, I think 20% of the plants up there were growing up there before, and a lot of them are very hardy. And so some of them don't need very much water. And so that's the challenge is not over-watering and then watering the ones that do need more water.
In the front here.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on this, and I come up with all around you before you started, the Thomas of Babel, AIG for one, but many others, I'd rather not mention. How did you come from that kind of thing, the height, down where you became a climber?
So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I'll do my best. So
Well, it's Thomas of Babel all around you.
Right.
Now you're coming up with something on the ground.
Right.
Completely opposite of the power.
Right. So the question is with tall buildings all around us in New York City, and we're working down on a lower plane, how did that affect what we ended up creating? I think what's interesting about the level of the Highline is it's a very particular elevation in New York City. We call it gets called Park in the Sky. It's actually not very high up in the sky. It's only 3 stories up. And one of the things in the beginning, people kept saying, oh, people are going to jump off it. And people are going to jump off a 3-story high thing. But that unique elevation, it gives you a degree of separation from the street, so you feel like you're removed from the street, but you're actually still not very far away from it. It's not like being on the top of the Empire State Building where you look down and everybody's an ant. When you're at the railing of the Highline, and if you see your friend on the street below, you can still wave to them and have a conversation with them. People are still real and interacting back and forth at that level. And I think that's one of the very special dynamics of that particular height. And at the same time, we're also, we're part of a program called Rails to Trails, and usually Rails to Trails go through very, very rural areas. This is a unique rail trail in that it's going through this very densely urban, tall environment that you described, and that's really one of the things that makes it special, and it's one of the things that we really tried to celebrate in the design is the interrelationship between this very special 3-story high ribbon of green and the buildings that are all around it.
How was the steel structure really maintained over time with all the plans?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the other big criticisms is that, oh, it's old, it's going to fall down. It's not that old, really. It was built in 1934, and it was so overbuilt because of the freight trains. Like, if you look up in it, you'll see so many steel girders where you normally would never see that. It was so overbuilt because of the vibrations of the train. And it was in surprisingly good shape. None of that had to, or very little of it had to be replaced. And when we rehabbed it, it's engineered to last for another 200 years. There's a waterproofing layer between it and the planting. So, I think it'll last for a long time.
And the drainage system was completely overhauled to carry what most of the water is actually absorbed by the plant materials, but what little runoff you might have, there's a totally new drainage system to carry it away.
Can we do one more question?
Thank you. Great presentation, and I do love the Highline. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about how you won over the neighborhood, because as a New Yorker, I know there was resistance from the people who live in the neighborhood, not the commercial, not at all commercial. But I know, yeah. What did you do with the residential people?
So the question was how did we win over the neighborhood? That the ask her the questions that she knew that there was resistance to the idea in the beginning, and some people didn't like the Highline, which was very true. So there were a number of reasons people had questions about whether this should actually happen. There were people who live in our neighborhood who remember the trains running on the Highline, and that was not, we think, we show these black and white pictures of the trains, and they look really romantic. Well, it wasn't actually that romantic. It was noisy and smelly and sugar buildings. People remembered that and wanted to erase that and eliminate the possibility of it ever coming back. There were pigeons that roosted in the beams underneath there, and they pooped on the street and would poop on your head, and that was actually one of the big negative conditions that neighbors cited. You know, and there's also something, you know, in some ways we, I think, embody some of Jane Jacobs' writings and in the way that we've carried forward certain things that we've done. But she also was somebody who identified how elevated structures can divide neighborhoods and separate neighborhoods. And so some residents thought it really separated the residential part of Chelsea from the riverfront. Some of the things that we did to change those feelings was really to talk with our neighbors, to bring them up on the Highline and show them how amazing it could be, and really engage them in the process of the Highline's transformation. I think a lot of them didn't. One of the things that they were holding in their head was they didn't think it could happen. There was a previous Save the Highline movement before us, led by a guy named Peter Oblitz, who actually, through an arcane railroad proceedings, actually ended up owning the Highline for a $10 price tag back in the mid-1980s. That got overturned. And so the neighborhood had seen a whole Save the Highline movement come and go. And I think when it became apparent that this was it could actually really happen, I think a lot of people's skepticism turned into real enthusiasm. That said, we're now runners of a park that has 3 million people a year, and we get all sorts of...
Rob, thank you.
They won over the neighborhood the same way they won over us this evening. With incredible intelligence, commitment, passion, charm. Thank you both.